Hey everybody, thanks for joining us. I'm Mike Honeycutt with Corero Network Security, and today I'm joined by none other than Corey Still, our Vice President of Strategic Alliances. Corey, I'm glad you're here, man. It's nice to have you. How are you doing today?
Man, I'm great, man. I've just been out talking to partners around the world about actually some of the topics we're talking about today. So I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome, awesome. So today's topic is all about multi-home DDoS protection and strategies that service providers and enterprises can implement. And before we get into that, I just want to introduce. So we're focusing on a topic that we believe is overlooked, and it's increasingly critical to protecting environments from DDoS threats, right? So we know that the vectors are changing, the scale is changing, and we also know that this idea of multi-homing isn't new, but perhaps people don't really know what multi-home means. So perhaps we could take a step back and you can sort of unpack what multi-homing means to the audience.
Sure. I mean, it's really quite simple, right? Whenever an organization has a multi-connectivity requirement or has connectivity from multi-providers, right? Essentially, we think of that as multi-home, meaning they have particular IP addresses that are destined to their home, but through another provider. That's multi-home, and it comes with all kinds of challenges, which we're about to explore.
Awesome, awesome. So with that, why would an enterprise want to be multi-homed? Like just
Sure. I mean,
unpacking that.
yeah, sure. It's a good question. And some of it can be regulatory. There's many geographies in the world where it's a requirement depending upon what industry you're in, whether it's finance or critical infrastructure or something like that. There are regulatory elements associated with multi-homed, right? A lot of those are based around resiliency, right? So even if there's no
Mhm.
government requirement or regulatory environment for which you exist, then there still
Mhm.
is this resiliency thing where theoretically, if one internet provider goes down, then you can still be up and running.
Awesome, awesome. And we can tell you're a very busy man, judging by the chime. So he's really out there talking to people in the field. So you talked a little bit about resiliency, but is there a performance aspect to it, or like just sort of an SLA uptime thing? Or is it just resilience? Like, is there a testing? Are there other sorts of reasons why somebody would multi-home?
Yeah, I mean, it could be geography, like there could be like a geographical reason for it. It could be
Mm,
splitting up workloads across one provider or the other, those kind of things, right? It's sort of the way that you architect your network or your data plane or your business plane, as I call it, right? And
okay.
so there are other reasons why why you would do that. And typically you can get different performance elements, with that, but the primary reason is really around resiliency of your network space.
Great. Thanks for unpacking that. So what are some challenges that come, along with multi-home organizations? So they are multi-home, they've got different links coming in, and how does that impact the service availability aspect that we love to always talk about that goes along with the resiliency?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when you look at this from organization, like an organizational perspective, um, you need to protect yourself against DDoS attacks, focusing on service availability, keeping your environments up, right? Whether it's your employees being able to utilize the internet, whether it's your customers trying to access you, whether it's your customers trying to buy your goods and services from you in line, or whatever your reason for being is in terms of a corporation, right? So that's complicated when you have two environments, right? So
Uh-huh.
there are different approaches to that, right? But certainly, you have two links, you have two separate problems, right? Sometimes there's two separate, types of traffic that are traversing that particular environment. So, you often look for your service provider to be your first, line of defense, protecting against, all of the DDoS attacks that are coming through the pipe, at least from a volumetric perspective, right? So it won't overwhelm your pipe, right? But what
Hmm.
happens if one provider has such protection and one provider doesn't, or one provider provides a
Right.
great, like a great experience and the other one doesn't, or what
Sure.
happens even if they're great, even if they're both great, but now you're going to have two different kind of portals, two different environments. Maybe that's good, maybe it
Yeah.
isn't. But generally
Uh-huh.
speaking, from an operations perspective, you want to simplify things, right? And so
Sure.
that's that's a potential, all the different permutations in terms of problems that you as an enterprise is gonna have, right? And then conversely, if you looked at around from a service provider perspective, when I have a customer as a service provider that's multi-homed, I know that I can protect them really well if I have my own DDoS service that I'm protecting them from within the network. But now my customer is a multi-home customer. Now that's not going to be good enough because they still have this other third-party link that they need to protect against that I can't do, just holistically as a service provider, because I only have control over my network, right? So that's the other side of that, right? The service provider has that challenge of trying to provide that service to the enterprise, and the enterprise has this problem of trying to protect both links.
That's great. And right on cue, we got a question just now. So speaking to like false positives, right? Or how do you avoid, so the question is, how do you avoid over mitigation or blocking the legitimate traffic across shared links?
Yeah,
so reducing those false positives.
Yeah. So let's just talk about false positives for a second. Nobody can guarantee that the elimination of false positives, right? That's just not the case. I mean, anybody that suggests otherwise is not being entirely truthful, right? And I'm being kind when I say that, right? It's just not possible, right? So the element, and it was sort of embedded in that question. So good question, by the way, is really around how you limit them, right? And you limit them by making sure that your analytics are great, that you're looking through different glasses when you're in terms of looking at that traffic, that sort of thing. And when you're talking about protecting multiple circuits, right? It's important that you have the capability in terms of the software or hardware that's protecting that can actually do that sort of work to make sure that you're not double counting, that you're not that it's a DDoS attack, that's over here it's legitimate traffic, over here it's not, that kind of thing, right? And so it's, that's really important that you have that ability to pull all that together in one sort of consolidated approach.
Great answer. Thanks for that. And so another one that follows that is, can this work with existing tools? So if they already have something in place with other vendors, will a solution such as ours or what we're offering in multi-home aspect, is it adaptable? Is it flexible?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, from a Corero perspective, we can work with many different technologies. Just generally speaking, we can work with anything that you have today, right? Whether it's integration with your routers, your existing routers, right? Whether it's Juniper, which is a strategic alliance partnership of mine, or whether it's any router that supports BGP flow spec, we can actually push filters directly to that. Whether it's utilizing your existing cloud infrastructure, right, that we can actually work with and do the routing back to the cloud if volumetric is an issue, if you're protecting yourself on premise. So there's many different ways that we can actually work with whatever technology you have today and make your protection that much better.
That's awesome. So we talked about the technical aspect. We were going in sort of how you would operationalize it, but let's take a step back and look at the business side. So, and you kind of touched on this in the previous question, but what's the real impact and the business impact of an unprotected link? So your multi-home, you mentioned earlier, maybe your service provider, they're providing DDoS protection, right? But then you have another unprotected link. What is the risk to your business with having that unprotected link?
Yeah, I mean, the real simple answer is it kind of depends, right? And it kind of depends on what's sitting behind that third-party link that's left exposed, right? So if there's operational things, transactional things that your business relies on, right, then it can be considerable, right? Both in terms of brand degradation, lost revenue, those kind of things, customer satisfaction, all of those things can be hit big time, right? And there's different ways of utilizing your existing provider that does provide DDoS to help with that. But at the end of the day, you're kind of unless you have the ability to utilize some form of DDoS protection, you're going to be left exposed. And I just hope that you don't have anything critical that will cause either brand degradation, like I said, or loss of revenue.
Right, that's great because there are multiple ways to calculate the cost, right? We always talk about that at Corero. We talk about obviously, just the cost of downtime, but there's also the reputation, right, and the trust,
Mhm.
right? So all that has to be taken into consideration.
Yeah,
Um, so
absolutely.
um, let's talk about deploying and like how an organization would deploy multi-home or how they're supposed to think about it rather. So do they need to deploy protection on every link? What's the best way to attack this?
So the simple answer is to what's the best way is there's no real best way.
Okay.
There's a recommended approach, right? And certainly, the defense in depth or the layered approach is still the recommended approach. A hybrid approach is still the
Okay.
recommended sort of approach, right? And it all starts with like an on-premise deployment, right? The
Right.
on-premise deployment
Okay.
does many things, but the on-premise deployment then can take the ingress from both circuits, right, and be able to provide that base level of that base level of protection, right? That is really
Mhm.
actually, which is really critical, right? Like 82% of attacks nowadays are less than 1 GB per second, right? Which is going to cause challenges, especially if your pipe is greater than 1 gig. So your internet provider is not going to provide it, and any cloud provider you have is not going to be able to deal with it effectively. So that's going to be on you on premise, right? So first and
Right.
foremost, first thing that's going to be able to protect both links, right? So then the
Mhm.
next layer of that is, okay, so what happens if a volumetric attack happens? And volumetric is clearly dependent upon the size of link, right? A 2 GB attack on a 1 gig link is a volumetric attack for that, for that particular customer, whereas a 2 gig attack for a 10 gig customer isn't like, it's not a volumetric attack, right? Like they can deal with that, right? So it's all sort of dependent, right? But what you end up doing is you have two choices at that point, right? As a multi-homed organization where you have your inline or your infrastructure on premise that's going to be able to detect and mitigate stuff that's coming into your own personal network, right? As your pipe starts to fill up, there's two approaches. One is you can stop announcing the routes for the third-party link that does not have DDoS protection. That'll force all the traffic around, onto the provider that does have, the DDoS protection, right? Thereby filtering out all the elements of badness, and then the residual will be caught by your on-premise device, and then you're great,
Mhm.
right? Now, there's some environments where that won't work, right? For many reasons, but there's also regulatory issues where that won't work, right? Or there's policy requirements that won't work from a load balancing perspective, just from the way an enterprise may run their business, that may not work, right? So then the other option is you have a cloud element that you can then route your traffic from the third party link over to your cloud provider when when and if you need that, right? And the reason why you want to do that, when you need it and not always on, is because that introduces constant latency. The costs are exorbitant, for cloud. Generally speaking, you want to do as much as you can on premise, and then route to the cloud, when you need it. Those are the two basic approaches, right? That you, as a multi-homed organization, can deal with the attack surface or the attack vectors that come in across both links.
That's great. And it tees up because we got a question right as you were saying this. Is there any performance impact to having this on-prem solution in line?
Very good question. And the honest answer is that depends upon the technology that you deploy within your network, right? So from a Corero perspective, if you deploy, our inline, solution, right? There is no performance, degradation, right? Attack mitigation begins like sub-second, right? So there is no performance, implications. Now there is in some of the other technologies that you may deploy, right? But certainly there doesn't have to be, right? It all depends upon the tech
Mhm.
that you
Perfect. I want to, so we talked a lot about like the enterprise itself or the organization itself that may be multi-home, but just to sort of kind of wrap it up, if you're a provider, so if you're a service provider and you're providing DDoS protection today, I guess how can you bring up this subject to an organization to talk about on-prem, like why on-prem? Because they obviously if they know that the organization that they're providing a transit link for may be multi-home, but that other link may not be protected. How can they bring up this subject and talk about best practice around the conversation that we're having today?
Yeah, sure. Like, it's really talking about, defense in depth, the layered approach, understanding that, I still have a problem, I still have an opportunity there in terms of to help from a service provider's perspective. It's really around helping my client, making sure that that client is satisfied, right? And really, it does provide other opportunities as well in terms of, expanding other business within that customer base, right? Because it builds credibility. It builds the ability to show that, hey, I'm able to secure your business across multi-links, multi-environments, right? And then really the question, that I'd like to get to too is from an enterprise perspective. Hey, it's a really good question to ask your upstream provider, saying, hey, can you help me with my third-party link, right? What about an on-premise box? Can you manage it for me? Hey, is there something that you can do to make sure that that whatever tech that I deploy works with my other cloud provider, or works with you in the actual, the inline kind of perspective from my DDoS provider, within the service provider. So there's lots of perspectives on that on both sides.
I love that answer. Can you go over, just as we close out, how does Corero today help a provider in that instance that you just talked about, whether it be through analytics or just sort of the visibility that we provide? Can you talk about that, like our talk track to providers down to their customers? What are we giving or arming and empowering providers with today that can provide them that peace of mind, that solution to this pain point?
Yeah, for sure. We're talking about providing a holistic solution that can be deployed at multi-layers within your architecture as a provider, right? Whether it's at the edge, protecting traffic coming into the core fabric of the service provider's network. We have elements within the core fabric of the network that can protect against attacks within the core provider's network. And then from an on-premise perspective, now you can protect against the very granular ones, the small ones, the particular layer 3 or layer 7 ones that aren't caught up at the higher level, right? And then providing this all in one unified dashboard, one unified platform that the customer can come in and see all of the attacks wherever they're being attacked from all at once, right? Not only that, is that in so doing from a service provider perspective, if they're providing that kind of service, we also have an element of them that allows them to start helping them build their business through prospecting. So we can help them identify, potential customers within their network that may be, that are being, attacked, but don't have a DDoS, redirection service, or that aren't being protected by the inline or the edge, protection that we're providing as a service provider, right? So that all these tools that not only are able to help keep their customers up, keep their customers happy, but build on the ROI model for actually deploying this technology in this service provider, just to begin with.
Beautiful. I couldn't have said it any better myself. You hit all the points, man. This has been a great conversation. So because the multi-home aspect was something kind of new to me and to help understand. And I think it's great that you gave enterprises some questions to ask their providers, right? And then we've also spoken about today to providers and how they can prospect and find tenants that would be likely candidates for this protection model. It's been a fantastic conversation. Any parting words or advice that you would give either enterprises or service providers as it pertains to what we talked about today, Corey?
Sure. So from a service provider perspective, is really, as a service provider, it's really about how do I differentiate my connectivity, right? You do that by creating, a high resilience based, connectivity service, right? Which is all around, let's kind of filter out as much of this element of badness within my network as possible, right? Keeping my customer happy, right? And don't disregard the value of on-premise solution, right? It does not take away from the value that you as a service provider provide within the core fabric of your network, right? But the on-premise piece closes the loop, right? Make that now service sort of best of breed, right? And it's all around differentiating yourself to the client, right? On the enterprise space or the client perspective, right? Don't just take for granted what your internet provider tells you, right? it's important to understand what technology they use, right? Because that matters in terms of how what kind of latency they're going to be involved, what kind of attacks they can do, what's their response time, those kind of things. And really, it's like, hey, can I I want to use a multi-layered approach. I want to have something on premise. What can you do for me, and how does that integrate into my current solutions? And I already have a router infrastructure. Everybody does. So how do I utilize that to be more effective in delivering my protection for my business unit or my organization, right? How do I protect myself, right? Utilizing what I already have. Those would be the questions on either side of that I would really hone in on.
Beautiful. I love it. So with that, we're going to close it out. I would invite anybody watching today, if you have questions, you can always go to Corero.com, click on the Speak with a Specialist. We'll be glad to direct you to the person who can answer your questions in a very expeditious manner. Corey, thank you again for the time. I know it's late where you are. I appreciate you. I know you're busy. Great explanation. This has been a great time. And until next time, we'll see everybody later. Bye.
Take care.